There are some people who think that that idea was invented outside of Judaism, and that, and I've heard some people try to say that, well, there are other ancient writings, that are spiritual and stuff that predate um, Judaism. I don't, I don't believe that, but that's because I believe the creation account, and I believe that Adam and Eve were the first human beings, and that from them all humanity uh, gave rise. So there's that. So the practice may have been established, through those teachings. Often, when I have conversations with people who are not religious but they're moral, I will sort of use the same explanation. Well, what are the chances that you learned this from the writings of God? What are the chances you learned this from Christian uh, parents who had Christian grandparents and these things were passed on? What are the chances that our culture was influenced by Christianity and Judaism? And then you just adopted these teachings, but you don't really understand the source of them. Morality is sort of can be a subjective thing. And people just sometimes, like little children, when you ask little children, where did you learn that? Oh, I just thought it. I just, I just know it. They don't think that somebody taught them some of the things that they know because they just sort of adopted them and began doing them. And later on, we realize, of course, that everything we know about culture, anyways, and social interactions and things like that are things that we learn. And if you spent much time with toddlers, you'll realize that uh, they're usually not very civilized or culturally sensitive. They can be wild sometimes, and we learn these things as we grow. All right. Any thoughts or comments along these lines? That's my treatment of historical giving. And then we'll look at some Old Testament stuff that talks about how giving was taught in the scriptures there. Okay, we're all quiet this morning. All right, so what does the Bible say about tithing? I'm going to hit tithing first because it's the easiest target, I guess. I'll put it that way. All right, I want to look at Genesis chapter 14. If you've got a Bible, go ahead and open it there. If you don't, I have a stack of them here too. If anybody wants one, here they are. I'll just set them on this chair here, and Clint can pass them out if they ask for one. Thanks. All right, Genesis 14, verses 17 through 20. And just to give you a little context here, this is an interesting story, really. I've read it before and then forgotten it and was reminded of it this week when I was studying again. So the context is there's this large-scale war going on that involves 9 kings, and the victors take the spoils of Sodom and Gomorrah, and along with it, they take Lot and his family and his belongings. Lot is Abram's nephew, and his family is taken captive. By the way, anybody know when Abram's name got changed? How old was he? A little Bible trivia question. Just a little less than 100, very little less. The correct answer is 99 years old.
Didn't he do it when a covenant with him?
Yeah, when God made his promise. Yeah. And Sarai's name got changed also, right? To Sarah. Sarai. She got changed. Her name was changed to Sarah. But it was to signify sort of a change in Abram's destiny. And Abraham, I forgot what Abram means, but Abraham means like father of many nations, which makes sense when you think about the promise. All right, so one of Lot's men escapes when Lot is taken captive, and he brings word to Abram, and Abram mobilizes 318, there's a very specific number, who had been born into his household, and he attacks the army, recovering Lot, his family, and his possessions. I would say Abram was pretty gutsy. And 318 doesn't sound like a lot to go up against kings and armies and things like that, but he managed it, and he recovered Lot, and also drove off the enemies. And I think the king of Sodom was rather grateful for that, but I don't want to get into that. So after Abram returned from his, well, I'm not going to read that. I'll let somebody else read it. What does Genesis 14:17 through 20 say? Anybody want to read? I can read it, but so can you.
Oh, I don't need the
Sure you do. The audience does.
mic. After Abraham returned from his victory over Kedar Laomor, we'll just say K, and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shechem. That is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and the priest of God, Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing: Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. The king of Sodom said to Abram, Give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself all the goods you have recovered. Abram replied to the king of Sodom, I solemnly swear to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take as so much as a single thread or sandal or sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise, you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich.
Okay,
I will.
that's good. We can stop right there. So Abram, obviously, he's routed an army, and he could take the spoils and do what he wants with them. That was a sort of a right of when you won a battle. But he wasn't going to do that. What he did do was he recovered Lot's stuff and Lot's family and all of that, and his livestock and whatever else was taken. And he ends up giving a portion of that to Melchizedek. And we didn't get around to that yet, did we? Because I stopped you. Where did I miss that? Did we read it? He gave a tenth to Melchizedek. Okay. Wow. I'm caught up in my head, I guess. Anyways, he does give a tenth of what he recovered to Melchizedek, which means he gave some a lot of stuff away too, right? But he doesn't want to take the spoils of Sodom because he doesn't want to, he doesn't need Sodom's endorsement. Let's put it that way. He's pretty wise in that way. And he doesn't want to profit from this. He just wanted back what belonged to his family. And so he recovered that. But this guy named Melchizedek, who we're going to read about more, he comes and gives a blessing to Abram. And we really don't know a lot about Melchizedek, do we? But there's a bit in Hebrews that we're going to read that talks about him and explains him. But here we have Abram giving a tithe to Melchizedek. It implies that Melchizedek is superior to Abram, and that the fact that he gives his blessing, Paul makes the point in Hebrews, I'll just say that the one who gives the blessing is greater than the one who receives it. That's usually the case, isn't it? Or they're in a position of advantage at the very least. So if you bless someone else, you're taking something that is yours and giving it away. Or in the case of Christians who are priests of God, right? We're giving the treasure that we have in us, God's word, and maybe financially we're helping people. We're doing good things with what God has given us. That's what stewardship is, by the way, and sharing it with others. And we do it all for God's glory. The hope is when you bless someone who's not a Christian, is that they will see that this is coming from God and it'll draw them to God, right? You don't get any real profit out of this. because you're a steward. You're just doing your job. All right. So there's a verse in Psalm 110:4 that goes along with this, and I'll just read it to you. But this psalm is believed to have been penned by David, and it's considered a messianic prophecy. Psalm 110:4, it says of Jesus, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." If you want, I'd recommend you read that psalm, Psalm 110. It's really a neat psalm, and it talks about the fact that this Holy One of God his kingdom will reign forever, and he will be a priest after the order of Melchizedek forever. So that's, aside from Hebrews that we're going to read next, those are the only three places where I find Melchizedek's name in the Old Testament, or in the Bible rather. All right, so Hebrews 7. I struggled with this because I just want to read the whole chapter. We're just talking about giving and we're talking about tithing, but there is so much in this chapter. It's just so rich. But it talks a lot about the superiority of the priesthood of Jesus, as opposed to the Mosaic priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood, and the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood. But I want to point out to you that what happened here with Melchizedek back in Abram predated the Mosaic teachings, right? It predated the quote unquote the law as it was given, anyways. And I just want you to latch on to that. Because some people say, well, tithing was just under the Old Testament and that's been done away with. No, it was actually, yes, you find it in books in the Old Testament, but it isn't part of the Mosaic law. It predates it. Now, where was that original teaching done? We don't have record of that. We can only assume that it was something that God gave to his people, starting with Adam and Eve and moving forward. And then somewhere along the way, it was written later in the Mosaic law because God wanted people to understand that principle, and it was there for a reason. And I think we can learn from that. Okay, so I think I'm going to read some of this out of chapter 7 just because I got the mic and it's easier for me to do. And this is starting in verse 1. I'll just read some of it. So, verse 1, this Melchizedek was king of the city of Salem and also a priest of God Most High. When Abram was returning home after winning a great battle, and in Hebrews, by the way, he's called Abraham there, right? Because that name change had occurred. He was returning home after winning a great battle against the kings. Melchizedek met him and blessed him. And then Abraham took a tenth of all he had captured in battle and gave it to Melchizedek. The name Melchizedek means king of justice, and king of Salem means king of peace. I think Salem is like our version of Shalom. Anyways, there's no record of his father or mother, this Melchizedek, that is, or any of his ancestors, no beginning or end to his life. He remains a priest forever, resembling the Son of God. Consider then how great this Melchizedek was. Even Abraham, the great patriarch of Israel, recognized this by giving him a tenth of what he had taken in battle. Now, the law of Moses required that the priests who are descendants of Levi must collect a tithe from the rest of the people of Israel, who were also descendants of Abraham. But Melchizedek, who was not a descendant of Levi, collected a tenth from Abraham. And Melchizedek placed a blessing upon Abraham, the one who had already received the promises of God. And without question, the person who has the power to give a blessing is greater than the one who is blessed. The priests who collect tithes are men who die. So Melchizedek is greater than they are because we are told that he lives on. In addition, we might even say that these Levites, the ones who collect the tithe, paid a tithe to Melchizedek when their ancestor Abraham paid a tithe to him. For although Levi wasn't even born yet, the seed from which he came was in Abraham's body when Melchizedek collected the tithe from him. So, if the priesthood of Levi, on which the law was based, could not have achieved the perfection God intended, why did God need to establish a different priesthood with a priest in the order of Melchizedek instead of the order of Levi and Aaron? And if the priesthood is changed, the law must also be changed to permit it. For the priest we are talking about belongs to a different tribe whose members never served at the altar as priests. All right. In other words, I purposely stapled these pages together this morning, and it looks like I put them in the wrong order. I hate it when I'm dumb. Here it is. What I mean is, our Lord came from the tribe of Judah, and Moses never mentioned priests coming from that tribe. This change has been made very clear since a different priest who is like Melchizedek has appeared. Jesus became a priest not by meeting the physical requirements of belonging to the tribe of Levi, but by the power of a life that cannot be destroyed. And the psalmist pointed this out when he prophesied in Psalm 110:4. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Yes, the old requirement of the law was set aside because it was weak and useless. For the law never made anything perfect. But now, and this is the part I want you to get, now we have confidence in a better hope through which we draw near to God. And this new system was established with a solemn oath. Aaron's descendants became priests without such an oath. But there was an oath regarding Jesus, for God said to him, the Lord has taken an oath and will not break his vow. You are a priest forever. And because of this oath, Jesus is the one who guarantees this better covenant with God. So we have a better hope and we have a better covenant with God. And we're the beneficiaries of that, of course. There are others who looked into this and hoped for it and longed for it, but we get to experience it firsthand. They received the blessings of it if they were faithful under the old covenant, correct? But we get to experience it firsthand. He goes on to say there were many priests under the old system, for death prevented them from remaining in office, but because Jesus lives forever, his priesthood lasts forever, and therefore he's able once and forever to save those who come to God through him. He lives forever to intercede with God on their behalf. And he's the kind of high priest we need because he is holy and blameless, unstained by sin. He has been set apart from the sinners and has been given the highest place of honor in heaven. Unlike those other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifice every day. They did this for their own sins first and then for the sins of the people, but Jesus did this once for all when he offered himself as the sacrifice for the people's sin. The law appointed high priests who were limited by human weakness, but after the law was given, God appointed his son with an oath, and his son has been made perfect high priest forever. There, I did read all of chapter 7. So we have this perfect covenant that God has sealed with an oath. And you know that God cannot lie, and that if he says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So, and all of this is connected to Melchizedek, which also implies that this wasn't God's plan B. It was all part of the original plan, and you see it being fulfilled through the scriptures over time. But Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. He is our high priest. Now, we technically are eternal also, right? We're physically born, and we will probably, most of us, physically die. But spiritually, and as priests in the kingdom of Christ, we will live on into eternity also. So we have that much in common with our high priest, Jesus. All right. So let's look a little bit. Well, first of all, any comments or questions? Keep the questions simple, but if you have any. If I can't answer them, Mike, or we'll get an answer. I'm not afraid to say sometimes I don't know. I'll have to study it. Thoughts, comments? Yeah.
One thing I was thinking about is, the idea of giving, when they did sacrifices, that was giving too. And we know for a fact that Cain and Abel were doing sacrifices. So obviously God gave them instructions.
You were looking at my notes, right? Yeah. We're going to go there. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. If you want to turn there, Genesis 4, 1 through 7. But any other comments or questions? Christy, did you have a comment? She's always telling me, wait, give him time to answer.
I'm still hung up on Melchizedek. It always comes around, but
Yeah.
it says he was king of Salem. That's widely interpreted as Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
But the other kings. I guess the thing about him was he was both king and priest there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're trying to draw the correlation to. Jesus broke that Jewish mold and became king and priest.
Yeah.
As well. So.
Well, King of Salem, that sort of sounds like Prince of Peace, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it says he was a priest of the Most High God. Well, we all know who that is, right? There's only one of those.
There is some belief, while we will say things like Melchizedek is the type and shadow of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people that believe that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate Christ on earth.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't say that, but there's hints because
Yeah.
of some of those things.
Oh, and it even goes so far as to say, like the Son of God in some of those verses. Yeah. So.
But he wasn't like, I think he was a man. He met, he was without beginning, without end, meaning he didn't have any history. No one, there's nothing published about him, but
Yeah.
he definitely had a beginning and an end. If he was a man.
If he was a man only, yes.
Yeah.
But if he was a pre-incarnate Christ, or Jesus as we know him, then he fits the type for sure, at least. Okay. Any other questions, comments? You have a question on your face.
I guess my thought is what they're talking about in Hebrews is the fact that, basically you don't have the history of Melchizedek, how do you say his name? Melchizedek. I think it's more of a foreshadowing versus a pre-incarnate. That's how I look at it, but I could be completely wrong.
Yeah.
I think the idea is that he was born way before the Levi with the Levites and the whole priesthood, right?
Yeah.
So basically the idea is that Jesus was not a physical. It was not a physical kingdom, a priest of a physical. It's a spiritual.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that whole pre-incarnate thing, it is conjecture, but it's fun to kind of play with it. But I wouldn't fight over it for sure. It's not a hill to die on, there's also conjecture about the time when was it 3 angels that came to visit Abram and Sarah? And there's some people that think, hey, maybe one of those was Jesus, pre-incarnate.
Some people believe that the fourth man in the fiery furnace was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Melchizedek is
Absolutely.
pre-incarnate Jesus.
Yeah.
That's what some people have said.
Well, and it's pretty strongly implied here, isn't it? In what we read, anyways. But again, not something to fuss over. I think it'd be kind of cool to be able to ask that question when we get to heaven. All right, so Genesis 4, verses 1 through 7. Somebody feel like reading that? Genesis 4, 1 through 7. This is all about Cain and Abel and their sacrifice and how that went down.
knew Eve his wife. Am I the right place?
Yep.
Then she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a explorer of the ground. And in the process but Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you so angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it."
All right, thank you. So we have a situation here where you get the feeling that maybe there was some teaching done prior to this and that they knew what was expected of them. You can kind of look at the descriptions of what they gave also, and in some translations it's more obvious than others. I know, like in the NLT, it says Cain gave some of his harvest. Whereas when it talks about Abel's sacrifice, it talks about it being like the first fruits, the firstborn of his flock and things like that. It was like he gave maybe special attention to make sure that what he was giving God was the best that he had and not just some of what he had. But I think we have to assume that they knew right from wrong. God, for God to reject Cain's sacrifice, it wouldn't seem fair if they were just, although I don't want to judge God by man's standard of fairness. We can make that mistake sometimes. We can't second guess God. But it's implied here again that there was some teaching that was done and they knew right from wrong. And especially in God's admonition to Cain, he says, if you do well, won't it go well with you? But if you don't, then it won't be, your sacrifice won't be accepted. So apparently Cain didn't do well, or we might use the word right. He didn't do right. He didn't do what was expected. And God's teaching there is, sin is going to find an opportunity here if you let it. It's crouching at the door like a lion, we like to think of that symbolism. But it wants to devour you. It wants to destroy you. That is what sin does. Somebody taught me early on in my Christian walk that sin, they used alliteration to teach this. Sin first blinds you. You go, I don't really see anything wrong with doing this. It's not a big deal. Everybody else is doing it. So first it blinds you, and then it binds you. Then you find yourself a slave to that sin, and that it keeps you from doing the things that you know are right, and it makes you feel guilty, and you might even be ostracized by the people around you. So it binds you, and then at the end, it grinds you. It destroys you. And we know from Scripture that sin brings about death. That's the final result of it. And not just physical death, sometimes that's true also, but also spiritual death. So that is how sin operates. And God is telling Cain this: sin will destroy you if you let it. You must rule over it, is the admonition.
There was the next verse, I think, is quite interesting, where it says that Cain told his brother Abel what God had told Cain.
Yeah.
You would think that, it just makes it even more striking to me that it was an intentional choice on his behalf to kill his brother and to reject God.
Yeah.
But then he whines back to God later,
Yeah.
But yeah, you think you go to your brother and say, God told me this, that I was in error, and he lifted you up. It's just I don't know. It's an interesting verse to me that Cain would go back and tell his brother Abel.
Yeah. And this is a little off topic, but I feel like he did that just to make God mad, to get it back at God. He couldn't strike God, right, or strike back at him, but oh, so this is the favored one? I'll just kill him and show God, you know.
We're talking about giving, so I mean, it could have been that, you know, you said, well, how can I please God now, and how can I give like you did?
Yeah.
You know, but he didn't.
Yeah. Okay, so we need to give attention to God's God's instructions regarding giving. It's, you know, not a complicated lesson really, but we need to understand what God expects. And again, as a new Christian, when I asked the question, well, what should I give? Somebody in the class said, well, you know, how, because I was wondering how much should a Christian give? Somebody said a tithe, and then somebody else said, oh, no, we don't tithe in the New Testament. And I'm trying to kind of make the point that it's a great place to start. It gives you a framework to build on. Uh, and I've always thought it's pretty fair. I wish we would tax people this way. You know, I mean, doesn't it seem fair? If you make $100, you give $1 in tax. If you make $1,000, you give $100 in tax. If you make more, you give more. But it's graduated. Because the guy that only made $10 this week, he's thinking, man, I don't know how I'm going to survive on this, but I can probably spare $1, you know, or 10 cents or whatever it is. It just seems more fair. And when I talk to my friends about that, my friends usually that are not Christians, I should say, they say, well, nobody will ever go for that. You know, the rich people are not going to pay 10% tax or 6% even. And it's not going to work. And I'm like, well, it sure beats everybody else's plan. I think it was God's original plan, and that's another reason to side with it and say it's a good idea. But it's just a good place to start, anyways. And then if you can do better, great. And if you talk to some old Christians, you'll find out that there are benefits to giving that outweigh the cost of it. And I'm not just talking about, we talked about a lot of stuff over this course of this class, but I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about your time and your talents. You know, what is more precious to you than your time? I'm retired now, and I find I don't have enough hours in the day to get the stuff done that I want to do. I don't have to go to my job anymore, but yes.
But is this really talking about what we do, or is it financial?
Well, I mean, Abel, he was a shepherd, right? So it was kind of what he did, and
But
he gave a
it was
portion of it.
financial situation with what he did.
Yeah.
He could have sold, whatever.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the tithes under the Old Testament laws, the Mosaic laws, and there were opportunities to do that. Like if you couldn't give your lamb or whatever up, for sacrifice, you could redeem it, but there was a surcharge. It would like cost you whatever it was assessed value was, and then 20%. We'll talk about that. So it was like, if you don't want to give, or if you can't give for some reason, and I can't imagine what reasons you might use, but it's in the old law. You could redeem it. You could buy it back under certain circumstances, Yes.
I think that more of what he's talking about too is almost like the lady
Yeah, the widow and her mite.
where your mindset is when you're getting.
Absolutely.
And that's what he's training.
Yeah.
You want everything where it should be.
Some might argue that the widow didn't have a lot to be thankful for because she didn't have a lot, right? Of the things that the world equates to happiness. Doesn't everybody deep down think that, man, if I just could win the lottery, or if I could just, my uncle could die and leave me $1 million or whatever, that sure would solve a lot of problems. It might create a lot of problems too, though. And we all know this to be true. A friend of mine had a sign on his desk one that said, money isn't everything, but it runs a close second to whatever's in first place. And the idea was you can solve some problems with money, yes. Lord knows that's true when you're dealing with insurance companies and construction and things like that. But Ultimately, what God wants is a grateful heart. And he wants you to give out of that grateful heart. And that's what the widow did. Yes.
I was gonna say too, the intentionality behind it too. It's amazing the things people plan to do with that money they're gonna get, right? Like, I'm gonna use my tax refund for this, or I'm gonna win the lottery and I'm gonna use it this way, or I'm
Yeah.
gonna win this game show and do it this way. And most often they do not do any of those things. Like, the intention is there, but the actual like follow through.
Yeah.
The practice of the discipline of giving, right? That's an intentional discipline that if, and that I think is what's really important with giving is you have to plan it, you have to be intentional with it, and it has to be with what you currently have.
Yeah.
Because our desires in our heart is for these really good things. I mean, people do this in all areas of their life, right? Like, I'm going to do this with my health, or I'm going to do this with my like emotional or my time, things like that. But you actually have to plan out.
Yeah.
I want to do this service, and so I'm going to set aside this day. And so that will be
Yeah.
a difference.
Let me ask you this. When your anniversary rolls around, those of you that are married or have been married, when your anniversary rolls around and at the last minute your husband just decides, hey, let's go to dinner. Is that anywhere near as big a deal as when he like plans something out, even if it's silly? If he plans it out ahead of time and goes out of his way to make something special happen on that anniversary, doesn't that mean so much more? When he puts,
trying to get his husbands in trouble.
no, I'm trying to give you a tip actually. But if you put forethought into something, it shows that your thoughts are on that person. And when you say, I want to give this much, I want to start to give at this level, it puts it, it requires some forethought and it shows the intention of your heart. And it's just shy of maybe a vow. We're afraid to use the word vow, because of some of the things that the scripture says about vows, like don't make a vow to God and then not keep it, things like that. So we're afraid to use that, but we're okay with like planning and preparing and things like that. So let's say we plan to give to God back at a certain level, and we think about it not just in financial terms, but in terms of our time and our energy and our resources. That means so much more to God, just like it means more to your spouse when you do something like that. You want to believe that that guy thinks about you during the week when you're not together, and that he wants to like somehow demonstrate his love in something that's not just tangible, but also shows where his heart's at and things like that. God loves a cheerful giver, right? The widow was a cheerful giver, even with her mite. All right, we're all out of time, guys, but we'll finish up this lesson next week, and we're going to talk a lot about the tithes that were given under the Old Testament to give you perspective on like what was expected of the Jews. And here's where I'm going with that. I'll just sort of pre-teach on this and say, my argument has always been we live in a better, covenant with better promises and better hope. And so maybe we ought to do better in other areas also and show our gratitude in line with that. But we'll look and see what they did under the Old Testament, and that'll give us some perspective on maybe how we should do in the new, under the New. And also, we talked a little bit about pagans and their giving, and I think we ought to do better than them too. But that's just my opinion. Yes, Lou.
Well, I've been studying the old sacrifices of the Jews,
Uh-huh.
and it looked as if it became a work instead of a
Yeah.
gift,
Yeah.
and it looked as if God is saying, "Be faithful, uh, give me, uh, uh, believe in me
Yeah.
instead of just giving," and it ended up in the Jews listening to Pharisees and Sadducees and them making
Right.
what they're supposed to be doing.
And it just became rote. Yeah.
Right.
And what does Jesus say to the churches, in Revelation? he says, go back to your first love, right? Remember that. That's kind of what you're supposed to do, by the way, guys, when you're remembering your anniversary. You're supposed to remember just how bubbly and sparkly that lady made you feel back then and somehow recover that in the moment, you know. So there, you had a comment, Gary.
Yeah, just our trip this summer was to Greece, and we got to go to the Delphi, which is the place up on the mountain
The
where
temple.
all the city states would bring their gifts to Apollos and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And at the as you go along, they had these storehouses built where they would protect all their gifts from Athens or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing, just just think about being in that place where just for thousands of years people had come to give their best, but it was all about show. It was all about who could give more than the
Yeah.
other. And you know, yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't there like an oracle at Delphi also or something like that? There was like this oracle at Delphi that.
Yeah, oracle is breathing the gases coming out of the fissure in the rock down in the cave.
Yeah.
Going into fits, and then the priests would all interpret what her ravings were.
Right.
By talking to the people coming to get their oracle, they would learn about the people and they would figure out a way to give them something that was never good or bad. It was,
Yeah.
They would interpret themselves. It was a huge moneymaker.
All right. You're free to move about the cabin. Thank you for your time and attention, guys.